Hello and welcome to ACT Personal Development and Hypnotherapy. I'm Anjay, and today we'll be looking at how to use the brain and its two minds better. In essence, how to use the hardware and software in here more effectively. Now, this course is for you if you're looking to make changes in your life. You've got goals that you're working towards, and you want to get to those goals more effectively, more efficiently, more comfortably. So not stuck in maybe old patterns that keep you from moving forward towards what you want. It's also for you if you want to get rid of stuff in your life, maybe too much anxiety, stress, worry, all those uncomfortable feelings, maybe that negative self-talk in your brain, in your mind, and even destructive behaviours. Now, I'll be showing you a very simple model called the one brain, two mind model. The reason I'm sharing this model is because it kind of gives you a roadmap of how to proceed towards what you want. It gives you a starting point and it gives you the final end point. Now, in this world of personal development, there is so much choice out there. There's so many techniques, there's so many processes, there's so many schools of thought, gurus, that it's easy to get lost in that fog of choice. Too much choice can be a tyranny. So this simple model hopefully takes us above all of that to a very simple model to give you that roadmap to start moving more effectively and efficiently towards what you want. Now, if you want to understand ACT, so I invite you and encourage you to play along with this presentation by starting off by putting your hand up. Okay, owning your experience. Now, with that hand, put the thumb in, put the hand over it, and place your hand on top. So this represents your brain. Okay, it's a very crude model, but it represents your brain. The top part, the most recently evolved part, this is where you are where your consciousness resides. This is where all those solution finding resources, creativity, all those functions exist. Now, when you operate from this part of the brain, you make decisions based on the proper assessment of the situation. You're using your rational thinking, creative mind, and this part of the brain is generally very positive. Now, there's another mind within that brain, and that's deep in the brain, and that's called our primitive mind. That little 1 inch, kind of the size of an almond, in there is what we call the primitive mind, the survival mind. Now, this comes from when we were cave people, so from our cave people ancestors. So at some level, we still have some of those characteristics, those instincts, and those behaviours of our ancestors. Now, this part of the brain is where our fight, flight, freeze response comes from, and where our anxiety, anger, and depression emotions come from. This part of the brain is negative. It tends to think the worst case scenarios. And when you think about it, that has to be the case, because when we were cave people, if there was a saber-toothed tiger in this room or one walking towards us on the street, it makes total sense to assume the worst and get the hell out of there. So this part's always negative. The other aspect of this part of the brain is that it can't innovate. It's not got a capacity to think beyond what it already knows. It takes the past and assumes it's laid over onto the future. So when we're stuck in that part of the brain, that's why we feel stuck. We can't take action. We can't think clearly because that part of the brain hasn't got that function. Now, how the two brains work together? Well, basically, when we're about our everyday activities, this part of the brain is scanning for danger. The amygdala, the security card, is looking out for danger. When it spots danger, it flags it through a body response. Our cortisol or adrenaline starts to get increased. And then that information is passed on to the intellectual mind, which finds a solution for that situation. And our comfort zone is expanded because now we know what to do in that situation because we spotted it, found a solution, and we can feel comfortable in that situation again. Now, what can happen is when our stress bucket's full, when our nervous system's overloaded, maybe through one big traumatic event, when too much is going on, and our nervous system's overloaded, or whether there's lots of significant compounding events that come to that add up to a big event, and our nervous system's overloaded. In those situations, the primitive mind takes over. There's no intellectual component surrounding that particular event and that memory. And from that point onwards, whenever we encounter that event, such as maybe public fear or public speaking, primitive mind kicks in, that fight or flight response gets triggered, anxiety, maybe depression, anger might come in because it's in control. That's all the system remembers what happened in the past around that situation. And because our nervous system was overloaded, it's remembered purely from the perspective of the primitive mind, that fight, flight, freeze response. So, in order to recover from that memory, that event, what most coaching processes, therapeutic processes, personal development strategies are designed to diminish the impact of this so that we get access to the intellectual mind, so we have an overview of what's happening. We have control, we have all the resources that exist in this part of the brain to come up with a solution and move forward. So going to the next slide, we'll be looking at some more characteristics of these two parts of the brain, and in particular what we can do about it, how we can recover more intellectual mind so we're back in control and have choice and can move forward. So what can we do about it? How can we move from the primitive mind and gain access into the intellectual mind? The first problem is when we are operating from the primitive mind, we often don't know we are stuck. We don't know that's where we're operating from because we're so familiar. It's habitual. It's what we default to because of maybe years of operating that way. A little bit like that fish in that little animation. It doesn't know it's in the murky water because that's its familiar, its background state. So the first step is to become a little bit more conscious of the fact that we are operating from that primitive mind. And there are many ways of doing that. The first way is to just to keep a diary of your day. Notice what's happening in your day. Notice when you feel a little bit anxious, worried, stressed, and maybe doing unwanted behaviours. Maybe having those uncomfortable thoughts going on. Just writing them down so you become more conscious of that. In essence, you're starting to use your intellectual mind to have an overview of what's happening for you. The other way is just to notice in the moment, when it happens, write it down, or at least flag it some way so you get to be aware of it. Other ways are to maybe take advantage of an external resource like a mentor, a coach, maybe a therapist that can feed back to you what they're noticing, observing, acting like a mirror so that you get to become aware of what's happening. The other way is to just become more familiar what it's like to be in the intellectual mind. That clear bowl where that fish ends up going into. What it's like to have a clear mind, have peace, be able to take action easily, be able to figure things out, having fun, feeling comfortable, having confidence and certainty. So just by having that contrastive analysis may highlight when you are in a primitive mind. So the next slide is looking at what we can do once we have got that awareness. What steps can we take in order to recover the whole two mind systems, so the two are operating as it should be together. So now we've found a way of noticing when we are in a primitive mind, so we're not fixated on it, or at least have some separation, so we know when it's happening. We're not lost in the trance of the primitive mind. What to do next? How can we get into the intellectual mind? How can we move our attention from the primitive mind? Because even when we're noticing it, our attention's still on it. So what can we do to move that attention to the intellectual mind? So I'm going to share with you and offer you 2 breathing techniques to do that. There are many other ways of doing it, but the breathing techniques are something that we can do in a moment. It can be covert, so people won't know that we're doing it, and it's just a really powerful way of returning ourselves to center, regaining control, regaining access to that intellectual mind. Now, when we're in the primitive mind, our breathing is from here up, and it's quite shallow, it's quite fast, because we're trying to get oxygen into our system, ready for that perceived danger and fight that's coming our way. Now, when we're in, and that's what we call the sympathetic nervous system, the fight, flight nervous system. Now, when we're in intellectual mind, our breathing is a lot deeper and slower. That's when when we're breathing out, we're accessing the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the digest and rest response. Now, what normally happens when there is something new coming into our lives and we get into that primitive mind state, our breathing starts to get aroused and breathing faster and shallower. And then when that danger passes, we give ourselves a big sigh of relief. And we enter into the parasympathetic, the digest and rest state. So that's a normal process of operation. Now, what can happen is we do get into that aroused primitive mind response, we can end up being stuck there, carrying that shallow breathing around us. In order to complete that cycle, from going from the sympathetic to the parasympathetic nervous system, we can artificially manufacture that sigh response, that tricking our nervous system in believing that danger is past, so we can relax. And here's the point: when we relax, we get access to the intellectual mind, all our solution finding skills, creativity, imagination, optimism, resilience. We have all of that. So in effect, we are actually addressing the concerns of the primitive mind by upping our ability to cope with what's happened in our lives. So we're not avoiding the danger, we're just making ourselves more able to deal with it by using all our resources. Okay, so that process of noticing the breath go up and then falling down is what we call the sigh response, or 7-11 breathing. That's breathing in for a count of 7 and out for a count of 11. And when we do that, our system relaxes, the primitive mind goes quiet, and we can think clearly. Now, the important thing about 7-11 breathing is that the outward breath is longer than the inward breath. Sometimes people find it difficult to breathe in for a count of 7 and out for a count of 11. So as long as the outward breath is longer than the inward breath, then that should be sufficient to trigger that relaxation response. So it could be 4 and 6, for example. So I'm going to invite you now to just practice that 7-11 breathing for a few rounds. I'm going to do the same with you. Now keep your eyes open if it's appropriate, because if you need to be alert, keep your eyes open. If not, just close your eyes and take a few breaths in for 7 and out for 11. Starting right now. And one more time. Brilliant. And notice what that feels like now that you've done that 7-11 breathing. Notice how more relaxed you feel. Now that's a great strategy for when we notice ourselves going into that fight or flight response in the moment around a situation. It could be maybe public speaking, having to have a difficult conversation. We can recover our state by just doing that breathing a couple of times. It'll be part of a natural experience of that situation. Gain back control. What we can do also is imagine maybe an event that's coming up in the future where previously we had reacted in a fight or flight response, the primitive mind response, where we can imagine that situation as if it's happening here, fully enter into that situation as best as you can, or to a level that's appropriate to keep you safe. And as you experience that arousal, that primitive mind response, just do 7-11 breathing. So you go through that response to a relaxed state. And by doing that a number of times, we can train ourselves to always be relaxed whenever we start feeling the twitch of the cat's whisker, that first sign that the primitive mind is beginning to stir. We can take back control and be in control. The other breathing strategy I'd like to share with you is what we call balanced breathing. This is when we breathe in for the same count as we breathe out. What that does for us is unify the sympathetic nervous system, the energy, the fight of that part of the nervous system, and the relaxed digest and relax part of the nervous system, the parasympathetic. So you've got the two together. We call it the relaxed alert state. And when we do this kind of breathing, it gets us into an optimal state to perform in our lives, whether it's something at work where we need to be on our game, maybe do a pitch to some clients, or it's in our sports world where we need to be on point, or other aspects of our lives. So let's just do that together. Balance breathing in for 5 and out for 11. Do a few rounds of those to get an experience of balance breathing. And I'll do it with you. So let's start now. And one more. And notice how that feels. How different it is to the 7-11, which is all about recovering state, relaxing. Whereas the 5 or balance breathing is about getting us into the moment. So notice that. So that's 2 patterns, 2 strategies we can have to bring us back into control and have access into the intellectual mind as well. Now, on the next slide, I've summarised the formula for taking back control using the 2 minds within the one brain in a way that serves us, puts us back in control. So we have resilience, creativity, a sense of fun, enjoying life as a challenge rather than as a problem.